71,000. That's how many combat hours United States Marine Corps OV-10 Broncos logged in Vietnam between 1968 and 1973. Not total flight hours across all services, not peacetime training sorties padded into the count. Combat hours, the kind where someone on the ground is trying to kill you, flown by a single service's fleet of a single airframe. The Air Force added tens of thousands more on top of that. So did the Navy. The combined number across all branches pushes past a figure that defense analysts in the 1990s simply refused to believe when it surfaced in after-action compilations. The aircraft that generated those numbers cruised at 223 miles per hour. Its two Garrett T76 turboprops produced 715 shaft horsepower each, less combined power than a single engine on the A-1 Skyraider it was partly designed to replace. Maximum speed at sea level sat around 288 miles per hour. A Cessna 172 owner could look at the Broncos' performance charts and feel a strange kinship. Pentagon procurement officers certainly did. According to a 1967 assessment from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the OV-10A was considered unsurvivable in a mid-intensity threat environment. The word they chose was unsurvivable. The aircraft went on to fly more combat sorties in Vietnam than the F-105 Thunderchief, a Mach 2 fighter bomber that cost 8 times as much per unit. By 1995, the last Marine Broncos had been stripped of useful avionics, sprayed with preservative cocooning compound, hauled across the tarmac, and rolled into desert storage at the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group in Tucson. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Row after row of dead aircraft baking under Arizona sun, their canopies yellowed, their tires flat. The OV-10's official career was over. Every serious defense journal that bothered to write an obituary used some variation of the same phrase. No role in modern warfare. Then, in 2012, something odd happened. According to reporting by David Axe in War is Boring and later confirmed through Defense Department budget documents, a small number of OV-10G plus Broncos were quietly pulled from the boneyard, rebuilt with modern sensors and precision weapons capability, and deployed to a combat theater that the Pentagon would not officially name for 2 more years. The program was called Combat Dragon 2. The theater was Syria. The aircraft that couldn't survive a mid-intensity threat environment in 1967 was being sent against ISIS positions in 2015. Flying close air support missions at a cost per flight hour that made the $40,000 per hour F-22 Raptor look like a budgetary obscenity. According to the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, the OV-10's operational cost ran approximately $1,000 per flight hour during those deployments. I think that ratio makes the modern defense establishment uncomfortable in ways it would rather not examine. 40-1. An aircraft designed in 1963, built for less than $800,000 per copy in original procurement dollars, doing precision strike work over Aleppo province with equipment bolted onto hardpoints that were spexed during the Kennedy administration. The Marines who flew the Combat Dragon 2 missions reportedly achieved target engagement times significantly faster than fast jet platforms operating in the same battle space. The records from those deployments remain partially classified. What has leaked suggests the Bronco's low speed, the very characteristic that made it obsolete, was precisely what made it lethal in a permissive air environment. Loiter time measured in hours rather than minutes. Visual target identification at distances where a pilot could distinguish a technical truck from a civilian pickup. The OV-10 Bronco was not supposed to survive its first war. It was certainly not supposed to be pulled from a grave in the desert to fight another one 40 years later. The story of how it got built, who fought for it, why the Pentagon tried to kill the program repeatedly, and why it spent half a century pretending it didn't need the aircraft starts with a Marine officer and a typewriter in 1961. What did close air support look like in the Mekong Delta in 1963? A Marine lieutenant radios for help. His platoon is pinned by automatic weapons fire from a tree line 200 meters away. The request climbs the chain. Company, battalion, division, air support center. 45 minutes pass. sometimes an hour. An F-100 Super Sabre arrives at 500 knots, covers the distance between the pilot's first visual acquisition of the target area and the release point in roughly 8 seconds. The jungle canopy below is an unbroken carpet of green. The enemy position is invisible. The pilot drops 2 500-pound bombs based on coordinates, relayed through 4 separate radio operators, pulls 6 Gs, and is gone. The bombs land 300 meters from the intended target. The Marines are still pinned. This was not an aberration. According to the Pentagon's Project Checo reports, contemporary historical examination of current operations, compiled by Air Force historians, in theater, close air support response times in South Vietnam during 1963 and 1964 averaged between 45 minutes and 2 hours from initial request to ordnance on target. The reports noted that fast jet pilots frequently could not acquire targets at all in jungle terrain. A Checo analysis from 3rd Corps in late 1964 documented 37 close air support sorties over a single 2-week period in which the attacking aircraft never positively identified the enemy position. 37 sorties, fuel burned, bombs dropped, flight hours logged, maintenance hours consumed. 0 confirmed effect on the enemy. The helicopters were supposed to fill the gap. Bell UH-1. Hueys carried M6 door guns and 2.75-inch rocket pods, could orbit low and slow, and their crews could actually see what they were shooting at. The problem was aluminum skin and no armor. Ground fire from a single 12.7mm DSHK heavy machine gun could turn a Huey into a falling debris field. By mid-1965, helicopter losses in Vietnam were averaging more than 1 per day. Marine Major General Keith McCutcheon, widely regarded as the architect of Marine rotary wing aviation doctrine, wrote in a 1965 assessment for the Marine Corps Gazette that helicopter gunships were paying a price in airframes and aircrew that cannot be sustained at current operational tempo. The math was brutal. A Huey cost approximately $250,000. A crew of 4. Average combat lifespan in an active landing zone hovered around 2,400 flight hours before a loss event, whether from enemy fire or operational damage sustained in the combat environment. The battlefield had 2 tools. Both were wrong for the job. Fast movers couldn't see what they were hitting. Slow movers couldn't survive long enough to matter. The ground troops caught between those 2 realities developed a vocabulary for it. Marines in 1st Corps called the gap dead time, the stretch between requesting air support and receiving something that actually affected the fight. Army advisors working with ARVN units in the Delta used a blunter term that doesn't translate well to official reports. The Air Force responded the way the Air Force always responded. More fast jets, better forward air controllers in the sky to mark targets with smoke rockets. The Army did the same thing in its own direction. More helicopters, heavier armament, bolt on more guns. Neither service stopped to ask whether the framework itself was wrong, whether what the war demanded was something that didn't exist yet. A fixed-wing aircraft that could loiter like a helicopter, absorb ground fire like an armored vehicle, operate from a dirt road, and put ordnance on a target a grunt could describe in plain English over a PRC-25 radio. Cheap enough to lose without wrecking a budget line. Slow on purpose. Colonel Kenneth Sams typed the requirement on a single sheet of paper. In 1961, as head of the Marine Corps Landing Force Development Center at Quantico, Sams drafted what would become the seed document for the Light Armed Reconnaissance Aircraft Program, LARA. The specification read like heresy to every airframe manufacturer in the country. Maximum speed was not a primary criterion. Low-speed handling was. Short takeoff from unimproved surfaces, 800 feet of dirt, grass, or pierced steel planking. Loiter time of at least 3 hours over a target area. A rear cargo compartment large enough to carry 2 stretchers or 5 combat-equipped Marines. Armor plating around the crew and critical systems. 4 external hardpoints for ordnance. Total unit cost under $1 million. Sams wanted a flying pickup truck with guns. 9 companies submitted proposals, when the tri-service LARA competition opened in 1964. The Navy managed the procurement on behalf of all branches, which immediately introduced bureaucratic friction that would shadow the program for years. Douglas offered a modified Skyraider variant. Convair submitted a clean-sheet turboprop. Grumman proposed something that looked suspiciously like a shrunk-down S-2 tracker. North American Aviation's Columbus, Ohio division, not the glamorous Los Angeles operation that built the F-86 Sabre and X-15, but the plant that produced T-28 Trojans and unglamorous trainers, submitted design NA-300. According to North American's own project history, compiled by engineer Edgar Schmood's team, the design process started with the cockpit and worked outward. Every line on the airframe served the pilot's ability to see the ground and stay over it. The twin-boom configuration was the key. By splitting the tail into two booms extending aft from the engine nacelles, North American's engineers achieved something no conventional fuselage could offer. An unobstructed rear cargo bay with a full-width loading ramp, a pusher tractor propeller arrangement that kept the props clear of ground debris, short field performance that met SAMS's 800-foot requirement, and a greenhouse canopy that gave the crew nearly 360 degrees of visibility. The pilot sat high. The observer sat behind and above, even higher. Both could look straight down over the side. A forward air controller trying to spot a camouflaged machine gun position in triple canopy jungle needed that sightline more than he needed an afterburner. North American won the LARA contract on August 15, 1964. 7 prototypes designated YOV-10A were ordered at an initial development cost of $8.8 million, roughly what the Air Force spent on 2 F-4 Phantom IIs at the time. The first prototype rolled out of the Columbus plant in August 1966, painted white and looking like nothing else on any flight line in the American inventory. Test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base reportedly called it the ugliest aircraft they'd seen since the XF-85 Goblin. According to North American test pilot Ed Gillespie, speaking to Air and Space magazine decades later, his first reaction was more practical. "I could see everything from that cockpit. Everything." Who exactly was the OV-10 built for? By 1966, nobody could agree. The Marines wanted it. The Air Force did not. The bureaucratic fight that erupted between the first prototype's rollout and the aircraft's eventual deployment to Vietnam consumed nearly 2 years. Years during which Marines were dying in the gap between fast jets that couldn't find targets and helicopters that couldn't survive finding them. The Air Force's objection was philosophical before it was technical. General Gabriel de Sosway, commander of Tactical Air Command, made his position clear in a 1966 memorandum to the Air Staff that was later referenced in Robert Futrell's official Air Force history of the Vietnam War. De Sosway argued that procuring a slow, low-altitude observation aircraft represented a retrograde step in tactical aviation capability. The word retrograde carried weight. The Air Force had spent 15 years and billions of dollars building an identity around supersonic combat aircraft. The Century Series fighters, the F-4 Phantom, the planned F-111. TAC's institutional culture measured progress in Mach numbers. An aircraft that topped out below 300 miles per hour wasn't just undesirable. It was an embarrassment. De Sosway's memo recommended that the Air Force fulfill its close air support and forward air control requirements using modified versions of existing jet trainers, specifically the Cessna T-77, rather than adopt what he characterized as a purpose-built aircraft for a mission the Air Force considered secondary to its core function. Close air support, in the TAC worldview, was something you did reluctantly while waiting for the real war to start. The Marine Corps saw it differently, and the institutional divide ran deeper than aircraft specifications. Marines had been fighting for organic close air support since Guadalcanal. Their aviation existed to serve the infantry. The Air Force's aviation existed to achieve air superiority and conduct strategic bombing. Helping the Army, if time permitted, ranked somewhere below both. The two visions of what air power was for could not be reconciled. The OV-10 became the proxy fight. Marine Commandant General Wallace Greene Jr. pushed the Bronco through Joint Chiefs discussions with a persistence that multiple Pentagon insiders later described as bordering on confrontational. According to Alan Millett's History Semper Fidelis, Green viewed the LARA program as a test case for whether the Marines could maintain independent tactical aviation procurement or would be forced to accept Air Force hand-me-downs indefinitely. The compromise, when it came, satisfied nobody. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's office intervened directly in 1966, ordering a tri-service buy of 271 OV-10As, 114 for the Marines, 157 for the Air Force. The Air Force accepted the aircraft the way a teenager accepts a curfew, grudgingly, with every intention of minimizing its impact. TAC initially assigned the Bronco exclusively to the forward air control mission, refusing to employ it in the direct fire support role the Marines intended. The aircraft would find targets for fast jets, but it would not be the thing that killed them. I think this decision tells you more about Air Force institutional priorities in the 1960s than any official history is willing to state plainly. The service would rather send an $850,000 aircraft to mark targets for a $2.4 million aircraft than admit the cheaper one could do the job alone. 6 OAV-10 Oz from Marine Observation Squadron. 2 touchdown at Marble Mountain Air Facility, Da Nang, on July 6, 1968. The heat off the runway shimmered in waves thick enough to distort the silhouettes of the parked aircraft. Fuel vapors from the adjacent helicopter revetments hung in the still air like a second atmosphere. VMO-2's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel William Chancellor, had 18 aircraft and 36 aircrew to prove that a turboprop designed by committee, delayed by bureaucracy, and openly mocked by the jet community could do what 2 years of institutional warfare said it couldn't. The first combat sortie launched on July 8th. 2 Broncos, call sign Hostage Able, flew armed reconnaissance along the Haivan Pass north of Da Nang, a stretch of Route 1 where NVA sappers had been mining the road and ambushing convoys with near impunity. The crews carried 4 M6 OC 7.6 2mm machine guns in sponson-mounted pods beneath the fuselage, plus 4 LAU 59 rocket pods loaded with 2.75-inch white phosphorus marking rockets, standard ordnance load for the FAC mission. What happened next was not in the tactical manual. According to VMO-2's after-action report for July 1968, declassified and archived at the Marine Corps History Division, the lead aircraft spotted movement in a ravine 400 meters east of the road. The pilot, Captain Robert Porter, rolled into a shallow bank at 140 knots and held it there. He orbited the position for nearly 4 minutes, low enough to distinguish individual figures moving between rock formations. At the speeds an F-4 operated, those 4 minutes of observation would have covered 28 miles of ground. Porter covered less than half a mile. He marked the position with Willie Pete, called in a section of Marine F-4Bs from VMFA 323, and the Phantoms put 8 500-pound snake eyes into the ravine within 11 minutes of the initial sighting. 11 minutes. From visual contact to bombs on target. The Checo reports had documented average response times of 45 minutes to 2 hours just 4 years earlier. The difference wasn't technology. The Bronco carried no radar, no laser designator, no computerized targeting system. 2 Garrett T76-G-416/417 turboprop engines producing 715 shaft horsepower each. A combined thrust output roughly equivalent to a single engine on an F-100. The difference was geometry. At 150 knots and 1,500 feet, a pilot could see a footpath. He could see disturbed earth where a mine had been buried. He could see the muzzle flash of a weapon firing and mark its position within 50 meters before the sound reached his ears. The smell of cordite and wood smoke drifted into the cockpit through the ventilation system on low passes. 1 VMO-2, pilot later told historian John Darrell Sherwood in his book Officers in Flight Suits that flying the Bronco in I-Corps was like being a cop on a beat instead of a cop in a squad car doing 90. VMO-2 flew 1,248 combat sorties in its first 60 days. The squadron lost 0 aircraft to enemy fire during that period. Ground fire hit the Broncos repeatedly. The after-action reports document 14 aircraft returning with battle damage in July and August alone, but the airframe absorbed it. The self-sealing fuel tanks worked. The armor plating around the cockpit and engine nacelles, which added 600 pounds to the empty weight and had drawn complaints from Air Force test pilots at Edwards who wanted better climb performance, did exactly what North Americans' engineers intended. Small arms rounds punched through the aluminum skin of the booms and control surfaces and kept going. The aircraft kept flying. The Marines at Marble Mountain started calling the OV-10 something other than its official name within weeks of its arrival. They called it the Bronco. The Air Force wouldn't deploy its own OV-10s to Vietnam for another 4 months.